friends, we are going to go ahead and get started with our reading today. It is Monday, June 1st, and it's our last week of our e-learning experience. I'd like you to get out your packets so that we can get started on our reading section. For today's reading section, we are going to jump back to last week's article. It was a nonfiction article, which means it was about real things, a true article about real things, titled Bugs, Nature's Time Machine. In this article, our author makes the point that it's good for us to investigate or to look closely at insects. So today we're going to talk about some of the reasons why she thinks it's good for us to take a good look at insects up closely. Okay, we're going to use what she says. We're going to try to find her reasons that she gives to support her point that it's a good idea that we look at insects closely. So what things does she list as reasons why it's a good thing for us to look at insects up close? In order to find those reasons that she gives us, we have to look at the text very carefully and very closely. So we'll do a quick reread of the text. Have you ever wondered what insects looked like millions of years ago? They probably looked nothing like insects do today, right? Not so fast. Insects long ago looked a lot like insects today. One kind of bug, the cockroach, has hardly changed at all. It still has a flat body and legs built for running. It still eats many different things, both living and dead. Cockroaches are built in a way that works well for them. In fact, cockroaches might stay that way, the way they are for many more millions of years. Other insects have changed a lot in some ways and not so much in others. Prehistoric dragonflies look much like they do today. They had long, thin bodies and two sets of wide wings. But there was one big difference. Dragonflies a long time ago were much larger. They had wingspans of up to 2 feet long. This means that a dragonfly could be as big as a dog. That could cause problems for people today. We are lucky that today's insects are mostly smaller than they once were. So far, we've learned a little bit about cockroaches and how cockroaches have not changed much throughout the millions of years that they've been on Earth. But we also learned about another insect called a dragonfly who has changed a lot in the millions of years since it's been on Earth, because the original dragonflies that were around millions of years ago had wingspans up to 2 feet long, which means they could be as big as a dog. Luckily, those insects, the dragonflies, have changed a lot so that they're smaller. The article mentions that most insects actually are smaller than they used to be a long time ago. Scientists think that many insects have not changed much because they haven't needed to. They were still able to find food and shelter as the world changed, so they didn't need to change themselves. The next time you see an insect squirming in a garden, don't say ew. Instead, look at it closely. You might just be looking into the far off past. I'm going to read this last paragraph one more time because that's going to help us give us a clue about what we'll be writing today. The next time you see an insect squirming in a garden, don't say ew. Instead, look at it closely. You might just be looking off into the far off past. All right. So, yesterday or last week, you should have completed the next couple of pages. So I'm going to take us to this page right here. Right here we see a word shelter, and it's in bold, which means it's in the very dark font that we see right here. They used a dictionary, which is a book that has the meanings of all different types of words, to define or tell us what shelter means. Shelter. 1. Something that protects from weather or danger. 2. To shield or hide. 3. A refugee. 4. A place for poor or homeless to stay for a while. Which one of these meanings, 1, 2, 3, or 4, do you think matches how shelter was used in the sentence in our article? So the sentence in our article was, they were still able to find food and shelter as the world changed. What kind of shelter do you think they're talking about here from our article? Do you think they're talking about the kind that protects from weather or danger? Do you think it means to shield or hide? To take refuge? A place for poor or homeless to stay for a while? They were still able to find food and shelter as the world changed. I think in this sentence, they are talking about meaning number 1. The shelter, the kind of shelter that protects us, okay, meaning number 1, the kind of shelter that protects us from the weather or danger. I think that's what they're talking about when they say that the insects were able to find food and shelter. That's the kind of shelter they're talking about, the shelter that protects the insects from weather or danger. All right. What sentence best describes the key point of the entire article? We know that key point means main idea. What was this article mostly about in one sentence? Was it mostly about cockroaches and dragonflies that have survived for millions of years? Was it mostly about insects that haven't changed much since prehistoric times? Was it mostly about insects are built in ways that allow them to survive? Or D, insects today are smaller and weaker than they once were? If I had to go back up to this text, because I always like to go back to the text to make sure I get it right. A lot of times that first sentence at the beginning of this text will tell us mostly about what this article will be about. It talks a lot about how some insects have changed throughout time and some insects have not changed throughout time. So, if I had to decide what this is mostly about, I would say that this article is mostly about, let me go back to the choices. Cockroaches and dragonflies that have survived for millions of years. I think that there's probably a bigger idea here than just cockroaches and dragonflies. I think it's bigger than that. I think it's more about insects in general. Insects haven't changed much since prehistoric times. Insects are built in ways that allow them to survive. Insects today are smaller and weaker than they once were. I think I'm going to have to choose this article is probably mostly about how insects really haven't changed that much and since prehistoric times a long time ago. They're pretty much the same thing. Now their wings might be smaller, but for the most part, they haven't changed much, which is why we can look at them to help study what insects used to look like millions of years ago, because they really haven't changed that much. Okay, now I said that we'll be doing some writing today, and this is what we're going to write about. The author says it's a good idea to look at insects closely. She says that at the very end of our text. It's a good idea to look at insects closely. I want you to use details from the text to tell me why. Why does the author say it's a good idea to look at insects closely? I'm going to read that last paragraph for you again to give you a hint. The next time you see an insect squirming in a garden, don't say ew. Instead, look at it closely. Why does she think that looking at insects closely is a good idea? You might just be looking into the far off past, which means if you look at an insect now, because the insect hasn't changed that much in millions of years, you're actually looking, for the most part, at what an insect would have looked like millions of years ago, because they're still very similar. So why does she say it's a good idea to look at insects closely? Okay, go back and use the text to fill in that answer for number 7. And that's going to carry on. They give you lots of space. That's going to carry on into the next page. All right, we're going to stop right there on page 51. Today we talked about the main idea of this text, what this text was mostly about, and we said it's that insects really haven't changed that much in all these millions of years. The one thing that we did learn that has changed is, a dragonfly's wings may have gotten a little bit smaller, but for the most part, insects look pretty similar to the way they did a long time ago. We also talked about why the author thinks it's a good idea to look at insects closely. All right, that is it for our nonfiction text today. Reach out if you have any questions, and good luck.